Okay. So hello and welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could all make it out on such a cold night. I'm Brian Doddridge. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Village of Clinton. This meeting is being recorded, just as a heads up. So just anyone who's unable to attend can watch it at a later time. A couple of housekeeping points first. The Wi-Fi here isn't great. So on the call, just please make sure that your video is off, and if you can, stay muted unless you're asking a question. That would be helpful. Also, if you happen to be logged into the hall's Wi-Fi, it might be helpful to save bandwidth as well if you logged out of that. We haven't got the fiber here yet, so we're working on that. Okay, so as a little bit of background information on tonight's presentation, so at the request of some residents, Village Council sent a letter requesting that BC Assessment present to residents to answer some questions that they have. They responded quite quickly, and so tonight we have with us Boris Workington, a Deputy Assessor with BC Assessment Authority. He will present for us today. Boris wanted to clarify a few things. Firstly, this isn't a forum to actually revise your assessment. This isn't a forum to actually appeal your assessment, but he's over how those things are done. And this also isn't a place to discuss specifics about your property as well. I do want to clarify what the village's role is in all this. So we are just acting as a facilitator. We kind of the intermediary trying to get BC Assessment here. We won't be in a position necessarily tonight to answer questions about village matters. We're hoping we can keep the focus on BC Assessment because they're here to present to you and answer your questions. So we're thankful for that. This is your chance to hear from them, ask questions about the assessment and appeals process. Following his presentation. So there will be a question period at the end. And with that, welcome, Boris, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Oh, and sorry, if we can't hear you again, you're muted.
How about now?
Perfect.
Thank you. You know, it seems like making a phone call used to be so easy, and now I have to go through a number of computers just to make a phone call. So I long for the good old days in some respect. So first off, I want to thank Brian for having me here. It's nice when I'm able to get out and speak to folks about what BC Assessment does and what we're all about. The reason I like doing it is because quite often it takes care of some misconceptions. It helps provide a bit of a background as to what BC Assessment is all done or is all about. And it starts the conversation, which is really what it's about. Because right now in the month of January, as you all received your assessment notices, this is the time where people get concerned about their assessments. And this is a great time for us to talk to property owners. And we want to make sure that your assessment is fair and correct as well. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background about BC Assessment and some of the things that we saw happening in the Clinton area, and then we'll go from there. But before I get too far in, I wanted to introduce myself. So my name's Boris. I've been with BC Assessment since the early 1990s, so quite a long time. In that period, I've had opportunities as an appraiser to be involved in many property types. So I valued everything from residential properties, both single family and townhomes. I've been involved in the valuation of industrial, commercial, and investment properties, everything from large shopping centers to hotels. I've even done pulp mills and sawmills. So I've had a wide variety of experience. And the only reason I mention that is that what I want to hopefully convey is that you're not talking to someone who's read a script and delivering a script. I'm someone who's actually worked in the organization for a number of years, and I've been involved in many discussions like this prior. So I find this to be a good thing, and hopefully you'll come to the same conclusion at the end of tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about BC Assessment. I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope I can get this to work. Can you see my screen at that point or no?
No. Not quite yet, no.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll try something different. Did I get it?
There we go. And Boris, just again, just to keep up on bandwidth, you may want to turn your video off while you're presenting here.
Oh, sure. Okay, let me back out of here. Once I hit buttons here, my whole screen disappears. So let me shut this off. So my camera is now off. And share. All right, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
I love it. I love to see the snow.
Okay, yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay, so hopefully you can see BC Assessment 50 years. And this is actually pretty unique thing, because what happened 50 years ago, that's when BC Assessment was actually formed as a Crown corporation. Prior to BC Assessment actually being involved, what used to happen was that municipalities were taking care of their own business. They had to do all the valuation and figure out a way for them to distribute property taxes amongst all the individual municipalities throughout the province. That, as you can probably imagine, was really challenging to make sure that one property or one municipality is doing something similar to the next one, and it caused a lot of problems. So BC Assessment was born, and what our job is to do is to value every property every year within the province of BC. So on your assessment notice that you just received in, maybe it's still in the mail right now, or hopefully received it early last week, that represents a value that we believe your property would have sold for if it was for sale last July. So July 1st of the year preceding the assessment, and in this case, July 1st, 2023. So what I'm going to do today is give you a real high level thing or background about BC Assessment, what BC Assessment's role is in both valuation and classification, because those are both very important distinctions that we need to look at. And then talk about some of the things that are happening in Clinton with an overview, and then what to do, what steps you need to take if you have questions relating to your assessment. So as I mentioned, BC Assessment started back in 1974. And we just, the need was there to make sure that there was an unbiased and consistent organization that did the valuation. And this is unique to BC Assessment, or in what we do is simply the valuation and the classification of your property. BC Assessment is distinct and notably so from taxation. So in my career with BC Assessment, if I get asked questions about taxation, I really am not a good person to answer those questions, because I really know very little about taxation. I understand the relationship between the property assessments and taxation, but BC Assessment has no vested interest in or has any say in what the taxation is. And that's a really good thing. So what happens is that when we get to developing our assessment role, what we focus on solely is making sure that the value that we have on there fairly represents a market value as of July 1st last year. And that's why when people question us about their assessment, quite often we're very amicable and willing to work with you, because we want to find out what the value of your property is as well. So when you get your notice, there's a number of things that are on there, and this is something kind of interesting. Right now, within the province of BC, we have about 2.18 million properties. So that's the quantity of properties that we need to value each and every year. Those properties, when you combine them all together, equal 2.8 roughly of $1 trillion in value. So it's a significant value is what we have to do. And yet what we want to do is make sure that we got everybody's as correct as we possibly can. So in your assessment notice, we're going to quickly identify who owns the property, what the class of your property is, and what the value of your property is. And if there are any exemptions that should be applied, they will also be stated on your assessment notice. And really what BC Assessment does, it provides a real stable platform for the taxing authorities, the municipalities, as well as the provincial bodies, to determine what the tax rates are. And they know that when they do divvy out the taxes in that way, it's been done in a fair and equitable manner. So,
hey, Boris, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're still on the 50 years slide. We're seeing the actual PowerPoint document, not the presentation itself.
Okay. Well, I've got all these wonderful slides that you're not seeing here, so let me try to change this.
There we go. Yeah, we're moving along now.
Yeah. Now I'm going to try to do this.
And can everybody read that okay? Is that all right? No? Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna try and
Um,
get it better.
How to exit out of this participant
So if you do your, like,
screen?
your slideshow, and then when you
Yeah.
click share, it should choose which screen you're selecting. So then if you choose your slideshow, that
Yeah.
should do it.
For some reason, what was happening, it was, I'll do this and share. Do you see a different screen right now?
We still just see the, oh, that's better. There we go.
It should be full screen. Make it
So
legible.
it's a full screen on my end, and the slide that I'm looking at now says, how do we value different properties?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay, now just for fun, I'm gonna go back a screen. Did it change at all, or did it remain static?
Yeah, it changed.
Okay, good. Okay, I think we got it. Thank you for telling me, Brian, because
Perfect.
I'm running dark here. I can't see what you're seeing.
It's a law of nature that you have to have some technical difficulties every time, so.
Well, thank you for being patient with me. So, as I mentioned, what we do, we have to value all the properties in the province. And one of the interesting things I was going to say, even though we had an inception about 50 years ago, that's when we first started, we have the same amount of staff today as what we had back in 1974. That's BC Assessment. And what happens on each year is that with the growth of the province of British Columbia and all the new properties that are either developed or built upon, we add, in essence, a number of properties equivalent to the city of Kamloops each and every year to the assessment roll. So you can see our values are increasing, but also sort of the quantity of properties that we have to work with. And what that does, it makes us want to make sure that we have to be able to adaptable and as well as look to new technology in order to get things done properly, because we simply couldn't get the things that we need to do with the quantity of staff right now if we did not take advantage of all the technology that was out there. And I make that knowing full well of that my slideshow just wasn't working a few minutes ago. So, but if I go back to the assessments, as I mentioned, July 1st is our valuation date, but we also have other critical dates as well. And the one that's really critical is the physical condition date, and that's October 31st. So the reason that's important, if you had a property on July 1st and that property is vacant, but as of July 2nd, if you were able to start building a house and have it, say, 50% complete by October 31st, even though there was nothing there on July 1st, our assessment would reflect your property's value as it physically stood October 31st, but as a value as of July 1st. So we have a couple different dates that we have to work in there. And when we look to determining the value of a property, we really put ourselves in the mindset of what the market participants would look at in either the vendor or the purchaser. So we look to things like what's the location, what kind of view does this property have? Does it have any unique attributes that it would be impacted by the market value? And those are the things that we look to help determine what the value of that property is. So as you can see here, we consider a wide variety of physical factors such as size, age, quality, condition, and improvements. Those are all really important for all property types. When we look to single family dwellings as a primary or acreages, we look to see what's called a direct comparison approach. And that's where we see, well, what else is sold for something like that? When we start to do valuation of commercial properties, typically we do what's called an income approach to the value. So what we do, if we look at it from the eyes of a potential investor, and we say, okay, what expected kind of return could you get from this property? What kind of rent could you rent the space out for? So the reason that's important is that when we look at those things, a change to the property or even the change to the tenants may or may not have any kind of value associated with it. So if you go from one tenant who's paying $5 a square foot to another tenant who's paying the same rate, and those rates are also typical of market for this type of property, then you wouldn't see an assessment change at all, despite the fact that you had different tenants in there than what you had previously. So as I mentioned before, the things that really affect market value are the location. The one thing that isn't in here is timing, because timing seems to be the real key now. You can sell a really great property in bad times, but it would be really hard to sell a really good properties in bad times. So location, timing, the land use controls, and what we mean by that are zoning and official community plans or any kind of legal documentation that state how that property can be used. We look to land characteristic. Is it swampy? Is it have a view? Is it a really steep topography? What's the property actually look like? And then we look to the different structures. What are the age and condition of the building? How does that compare with what the market is looking for? What the market is looking for in Clinton might be something different than, say, West Vancouver. So we have to take into account those kind of things for the general specific location as well. And then finally, for industrial, commercial, and investment properties, we look at the income potential those properties have, and then apply a rate of return, which is typically how those properties are purchased and sold. I mentioned before that we do two main things at BC Assessment. One's to determine the value of your property. The second is to determine what the classification of that property is. And the reason classification is really important is that often determines what tax rate is applied to that property, because each different classification typically have different taxation rates associated with them. And those, again, are determined by the municipality or the province. So you can see here there's 9 different classifications, everything from residential, utilities, supportive housing, and that's where you have housing that is used specifically for supporting people, and it has to be a special legislative requirement to achieve that. There's major industry, light industry, managed forest land, recreation, nonprofit, and farmland. And then there's also class 6, and that's the business and other. So if a property is being used in such a manner that it doesn't fall into any of the other 8 categories, that's where it falls into class 6. So you can see that's where the other comes from. Doesn't mean that we're using it for a business. It just means that the use of that property does not fit within the guidelines for any of the 8 classifications. So we have an assessment cycle that we do each year. And this is what we're doing right now, is the vetting or the auditing of our current assessment rule. So since the notices go out at the beginning of January, there's up to January 31st to file an appeal deadline for your assessment. That's for every property in the province. There are no exceptions. Those are the hard dates that we go through. Once we get past the January 31st deadline, we get into what's called the Property Assessment Review Panel. And that's where we take a look, and the folks that manage to appeal their assessment prior to the January 31st deadline, we look to make sure that those assessments that have been appealed meet the market value test. And what we look at and what the property owners look at, we have discussions to see whether it actually fairly represents market value. If through discussions we find that the assessment is not reflective of market value, quite often BC Assessment will be making a recommendation to revise that assessment from whatever it is to what we believe is fair and supportable. So we're certainly not locked in. We want to make sure that we talk to property owners regarding their assessments. And then during the course of the year, or the balance of the year, we do, this is where we go through, we look at the new homes that are being built, we look at the changes that have happened, and we're notified of changes to properties anytime there's a building permit taken out. And then we also review the sales that occur. So sales are either through the multiple listing service, which I'm sure you're aware of, but also if it's registered at the Land Titles and Survey Authority office itself, we're notified of it. So sometimes there's transactions that occur between family members There's times when it goes straight from a developer to someone else, but if there's a transaction that occurs and it's registered as a sale in the province of BC, BC Assessment is aware of it. And then, of course, at the end of the year, that's when we compile all the information that we've gleaned over the course of the year to determine what the revised or the new value will be for the following year. So once we get through this inquiry period and through a little bit of the property assessment review time, then we'll be starting right into setting our values for the following year. So the 2025 assessment rule is already on the books for us. So as I mentioned before, BC assessment is separate from taxation, but we certainly understand the relationship between. So what happens is that your assessed value is then multiplied by the property tax rate, and that tax rate is going to be determined by the classification of the property, and the sum of those two, or the end result of those two, is what the taxes are going to be due and payable for the course of that year. Now, the one thing that happens, and one thing that I hear quite often, is that my assessment really changed and I can't afford that kind of change in taxation. Well, and this is where it's really good to understand what the impact is, because an increase in taxes, or pardon me, an increase in assessment does not necessarily translate into a change in taxation. So what can trigger the change in taxes are two things: if the municipality or the province change their tax rates, or if your property changes greater or less than typical properties in your area. So if your assessment change is less than what most of your neighbors have changed, and the tax rates remain stable from what they were the year previous, then it's likely that your taxes will go down for that year. And conversely, if your property changes in value more than the typical other properties in your area, then there'll likely be an increase for your property as well. So if everybody goes up 30%, as an example on my slide here, and there's no change in the tax rates, then there'll be absolutely no change to your taxation, despite the fact that your property assessment has changed dramatically. The reason it's important is because BC Assessment, again, wants to keep your value accurate and fair compared to its market value. So if there's a decision that one property is worth more than another, or would achieve a greater value in the marketplace if it was for sale, then it should have a higher assessment, and that usually translates to a greater burden of the tax sharing, or tax burden. So what's happened in the Clinton area? Here is a lot of numbers on a screen here, but a couple key ones that I'd like to bring to your attention. If you look at the bottom of the slide, here you can see that there's a total of 510 properties within the village of Clinton. And then if we were going to go through and summarize the values, this is what the 2024 assessment is saying, that the total assessment of all residential properties is roughly about $88 million in the village of Clinton. And then if you go through all the other different property classifications at the bottom, class 2, class 5, class 6, 8, and 9, here you can see that those will sum up to be about $118 million. That's what the township of Clinton looks like for the 2024 assessment. So if I go back to how values changed during the course of this year, what we can see here, and these are typical, this is what we'd say are typical changes for single family dwellings. In Clinton, the values went down around 6% on average for a single family dwelling. I've compared that to 100 Mile House, very, very similar. Cash Creek didn't go down as much, but Ashcroft went down a little bit more. So I tried to choose some areas that were close by to show that what we saw in the marketplace wasn't anomalous to the Clinton area, but it's something that we've seen happening pretty much throughout the whole area. Now, when we do our assessments, the one thing that we always keep track of is what is our success rate? How good a job are we doing, and what are customers saying about the quality of our assessments? And here you can see there's two different lines, two different blue colors here. The lighter blue represents the acceptance rates of our assessments across the province of BC. And you can see it's roughly about 98 to 98.5% for across the province. When we look specifically at the Thompson Okanagan, you'll see we're slightly above traditionally, and then we're pretty similar for the 2023. Of course, 2024 is still under process yet, so we don't have any numbers for that. But when I look at this stat, I think that's quite remarkable in that 98% of our assessments really go unchallenged and are accepted on their face value. And it's just the ones that a very small percentage actually get questioned through the whole process during our month of January. Now, specifically to your area, this is the roll stability in Clinton. And there's a couple things that I want to draw to your attention, and maybe I'll slow down here a little bit. When I talk about how good a job we are, I'm very cognizant of the fact that last year, I believe we could have done a better job in the valuation in Clinton. So what you can see here is that through 2017 through 2022, on the far left-hand side of the screen, you can see that the assessments under appeal through the village is somewhere between 3 to 6, with the exception of last year where we had about 29 properties actually under appeal. The next chunk beside it is where we show that the changes that BC Assessment has made initiatives to change. And you can see that despite the fact that we had 29 properties under appeal, we also found that we overstated values, or we had discrepancies in our value to what we thought was the fair market value for those properties. So we changed, with contacting property owners as well, about a further 56 properties. Because it's not a fair thing to change some and not others. And what we want to do is make sure that we're doing our job properly. So we took the initiative to change those other 56 properties. And then here you can see at the far right-hand side of the screen our acceptance within the township of Clinton. And we're typically a little higher than the provincial average. And where, again, we failed, and I don't think we delivered on what we could have done, was in the 2023 assessment. So, so far, I can tell you that through our measuring of statistics of inquiries that have come into our office so far this year, we've had 2 separate inquiries come to our office at this point. And if you look at the middle of your screen here, you can see where you can see 2024, and there's the number 3 there. That's because as our appraisers went through and looked at the village of Clinton, we found 3 individual properties that we believe needed to be revised in valuation. And those are some properties that were overassessed. I don't have the details on those, but we will be in contact with a few folks to make sure that we do get those revisions corrected, and we'll make sure that you're aware of it before we process any kind of information like that. Now, the one thing that is really important is that if you have questions about your assessment, we have a certain process that we can go through. And while this talks about deadlines, my suggestion is to always start with our website, and that's bcassessment.ca. Once you're at that website, by putting in your civic address, it should find your property really quickly, and then you can look at the details of your assessment. Not only can you look at the details of your assessment, but you can also look at what some of the neighboring properties are valued at, as well as you can see what kind of properties have actually sold, which help give you an indication of what the market value would have been like if your property was for sale last year. So I always suggest to start with our website. And then once you've got past that stage, and say after reviewing our website and you're not satisfied that the information is leading you to feel comfortable with the assessment, at that point, what I'd ask you to do is give our office a call. We'd love to talk to you, and we want to make sure your assessment's correct. And we've got our toll-free number is 1-866-VALUE-BC. It's a really easy number to remember, but once we get that process started, you'll find that appraisers will be able to look at your property and discuss the details specifically with you and try to see if there is any kind of information that can help come to an agreement between the 2 different parties. So if at that point, after the discussion with the appraiser, that you feel, no, I still don't like the assessment, I think it should be different, then this is when you want to, what we call, start the appeal process. And this is what you have until January 31st to do. So this again talks about the dates. We've got the January 30th, a hard deadline. Your appeal must be in writing, and it must be received by our office no later than midnight on January the 31st. The easiest way to register appeal is simply to go online, and I can show you that in the next couple of screens. Once you've registered that appeal, what that will allow BC Assessment and the appraisers in our office to do is to look more detailed at your assessment and to determine whether it is fair or not. And they'll be in touch with you. And then if not, then what happens is that we'll end up at a hearing through a telephone conversation. At those hearings, at that time, you as a property owner would provide evidence to a three-member panel as to what you believe that value of the property should be. BC Assessment will in kind do the same thing and provide evidence as to what we believe the value of the property should be and why it should be at this value. And then that panel will make a decision as to what they felt is the strongest evidence. Even if at that point, if you still feel that our value is incorrect, you still have the opportunity to appeal that, and that's on appealing to the Property Assessment Appeal Board. And once you're there, it's a much more formal process, and it gets more into doing the valuation like a typical appraiser would be. But that's the process, and those deadlines to go into the Property Assessment Appeal Board, that deadline is April the 30th. So we've got some resources that we can look at, and this is what I want to talk to you about. We can talk about our assessment search. If you want to look at up anybody's property, you can look up your kids or whatever. If they're anywhere in the province, you can find out what their property is assessed for. On our website, we also talk about how the relationship between assessment and taxes, and we even have a YouTube channel with different videos and things like that can help explain it. So you don't have to be particularly good at navigating around the computer. If you can get to YouTube, you can get to BC Assessment, and you can find information there to help you along with that. But in addition to those kind of things, we also have maps that you can look at, which will tell you different trends within your neighborhood, and also have links for various services and government that are associated with your area. Once you're on our website, once you're on bcassessment.ca and you put in your address, you can look at some pretty interesting information. You can see your property via a map, and there you can see some of the neighboring properties, or you click on that and you can see what they're assessed for. You can see photographs of them. And then finally, if you click on where it says sample sold properties, you can go through there and even find out greater details of what kind of properties have actually sold. If you choose to enter your or create a free account, I believe there's some greater functionality that will allow you to help do further things within our website, because we want property owners to be as fully aware as what they can be as to what information is out there. And finally, if after we've exhausted the steps that we've talked about before between looking at our website, talking to an appraiser, if you still want to request a review of your assessment, on our website you'll find this page, and you click on where it says Notice of Complaint and Appeal, and that will start the whole process. You'll need to have your assessment notice with you, so you have to put in some information that's on there, but once you have that, you're good to go, and we'll make sure that we take care of you all the way through the process. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd love to answer some questions.
All right, well, thank you very much, Boris, for that. We're now going to move on to the question period here. So we want to make sure everyone who wants to has an opportunity to speak. So I'll alternate between in-person and online questions. Please limit your question to about 30 seconds if you can, and everyone will be given the opportunity to ask one question and a potential follow-up question. Please try to make sure you present questions, not statements. And Boris has taken time out of his busy season to present, so we want to make sure this can be a respectful and productive conversation. So, and as a reminder, as Boris said, this isn't a forum to revise or appeal assessments or to discuss specific properties. So if anyone wants to ask questions in person, you can line up here at the podium, and online, you can press the raise hand button. Does anyone have any questions for Boris?
I have a screen.
Sure. Yeah, please come on up. We'll start with Janice here, and then we'll go to Annette online.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, for folks that are not comfortable with a computer, do you have a paper process they can use and then send it in via fax or some other way rather than have, because a lot of people are not comfortable with the computer, they don't have access. Just, that's my question. Thank you.
And that raises a good point. Thank you, Janice. Yes, if you take your assessment notice and flip it over, what it will tell you there is how to appeal the assessment. We found that traditionally most people like to use the internet, but I completely understand that other folks would like to use other means. And so we still accept mail. Mail still goes through the mail. So what you have to do is write a letter and make sure it's sent to us. If you look at what's on the back of your assessment notice, we'll want to make sure that you properly identify the property that you have questions relating to. So in that, we'll want to know the area, the jurisdiction, the roll number, who you are, why you're concerned about the assessment, what your concern of the assessment is, and a way for us to get a hold of you, either through phone or another means. If you decide to use traditional mail, it needs to be date stamped no later than midnight on the 31st of January. So if you mail it on February 1st, you're going to find yourself frustrated with the whole process. And that's one reason why I wanted to make sure I got out to you early in the process right now. So what's it, January 11th? So we still have a fair bit of time if you've got concerns. And if you're sort of in that middle stage where you don't like computers, you don't like mail, but you like to use the fax machine, our fax number should be on the back of your assessment notice as well. The same information that we require on an individual letter should be on your fax as well. And please send that to us and we will respond to that once we receive it and able to get it processed through our front end. So thanks for the question, Janice.
Thanks, Boris. Before we go to Annette here, do you mind just canceling sharing your screen there so we can see you a bit better? You're just up in the top corner for us.
Oh.
We just see your desktop background right now. There you go, much better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Oh, that's okay.
And so we'll move on. We'll move on to Annette now here.
Thanks.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for taking my question and thank you for the presentation. I'm interested in particular in the value that is assessed in the category number 6, which is business and other, and that is the highest value group in Clinton. And I think that's where a lot of headache comes to. So can you split that out a bit further, how that group of other, what it is, like which buildings, which properties are those? Are those the ones that are the small business on Main Street? Are those ranches? What are those, please?
Okay. Thanks, Annette. I can't really speak specifically to what those properties are, but what I can tell you is what would qualify for business and other. As I mentioned, there's 9 different classes of properties within the province, and each one of those classes have a very distinct criteria in order to be classified as that class. For example, to be classified as Class 1 residential, you need to be using the property in a residential use, and the assessment speaks very clearly as to what those uses are. When we get to Class 6, business and other, that's where we refer to that often as the catch-all classification. So if your property is being used as a business, either like a restaurant, as a grocery store, as a gas station, all those kind of items, quite often they'll be classified together as business and other because they fail to meet any of the other classifications. And so you remember if the other ones were like utilities, major industry, farming, and things like that. So if it doesn't fall to any one of those other 8 classifications, it will fall to Class 6. And that's primarily where the business occurs in town. Now, if your property is vacant and it is zoned for business use, then it will also attract a Class 6 classification. Alternatively, if the business is used, or let's say it's zoned for business and other, but it's used residentially, so someone's using it as their house, it's the use that determines the classification if there is a use. And so that would be classified as Class 1, despite the fact that it looks like a business. So for example, if someone were to move into a fast food restaurant, McDonald's, and do some conversions and make that their house, then despite the fact that it looks like a McDonald's, but if it's being used solely and only for residential purposes, it will attract a residential classification.
Okay, can we take another, is there another person from the floor here?
Hi, Boris. This is continuing class 6. I own 2 properties. The assessment has gone up 30 and 35%. Is that as a result of other class 6 businesses or class 6 properties selling in Clinton? Or is it, what's precipitated that increase?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm assuming you're speaking of vacant parcels, is that correct?
One is a vacant parcel, the other is has a commercial building on it.
Okay, okay. What I don't do the valuation of commercial properties, but I did talk to the commercial team, and what they were telling me is that what they were finding during the course of this year is that our values for class 6 properties, business and other, our assessments were conservative compared to what they saw either properties selling for, and then at the high end to determine a higher end value is what some properties were actually listed for. As you can appreciate, in small communities like this, there's not an awful lot of valuation or sales that we can draw our information from. But what we can do is take a look and see what is that best information telling us. And as a result of that, we found that our values were in the 2023 assessment or last year's assessment were just understated compared to what their fair value was. And as a result of that, we were required to increase those values to make it more reflective of market value.
And Annette, I'm sorry there, do you have a follow-up question to your original question there?
Yes, I wasn't fast enough to jot down the number 8 and number 9 of the classifications. And again, I wanted to know, maybe there is ranch in there or agriculture in there. I don't know. If you could please, Boris, say what was 8 and 9, please.
Sure. Class 8 is nonprofit and recreational properties. That's your parks and things like that. And you're right, class 9 is farms. Now, what I have done is I provided Brian a copy of our slide deck of the presentation that you saw. And I was going to suggest that if people want a copy of that, may want to talk to Brian and we can send you an electronic version of that. Or if you've got abilities to print it there too, Brian, that would be great, because certainly that's something that we want to make sure that folks can see.
Sure, we can make this available tomorrow via our social media channels and website and everything. Thanks, Annette. I think we'll go to a question from the floor now.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Hi, Diana Guerin. Question, and because I went into the tribunal last year, but when was the last time you physically came to Clinton and assessed the properties? I had a picture with mine and my subdivision, even this year, again, to look in comparison, and the properties are not correct to the pictures. How are you assessing it? Are you looking from a satellite view, or are you basing it on strictly planning, or what's the word I'm looking for? A sort of a map, if you will. Because
Sure.
when was the last time you came and physically looked at the village of Clinton in person?
What I can say in response to that, Diana, is that anytime a building permit is taken out, we're notified of that. And so we rely on the local municipality to let us know that there's been a physical change. Outside of that, we've been to each property at some point during the course of its life, and we've made sure that we've gathered our records and information from that, and that remains static. And the reason we know that, and we rely on that information as being fair and accurate. As I mentioned before, the province of BC adds about the equivalent of the town of Kamloops each year. So we try to use technology in order to do things. So to put that into perspective, to drive to Clinton to inspect 1 or 2 properties might not be the most efficient use of our time, even though we'd like to. In fact, as an appraiser, I remember being in the field. That was one of the highlights of the job, is to being out chatting with folks and making sure you can see properties directly. So what we do is have, we utilize as much technology as possible. So we do have folks that have, we try to keep up to date on our photographs. The photographs that we have for the property are for information purposes only. They do not determine what the valuation is. From when we've been to the property and inspected it, that's where we've gathered our information. If your property has changed, say your property's changed, but you haven't taken on any building permits, it's quite likely that we are ignorant of the changes that have happened there. So quite often, either it's in a positive sense, that you've added a bunch of, you've done renovations to the house, added an addition, done some other changes that make it more valuable. If there's no building permits out, we probably don't know about it. Or conversely, if the house or the property is in really poor condition and deteriorating, we likely won't know about that either. So this is why it's really nice for us to have a chat with folks during this month, so we can make sure that we get out there and get our information correct.
Okay, since I don't see anyone else here from online, we'll take another question from the floor here. Shauna.
Is he here or is he there? Hi, Boris. Nice to see you.
You too.
Just confused. I'm just a small town girl here. But you mentioned earlier that we, if all of our assessments in this community go up 30% and the mill rate stays the same, you said our taxes would stay the same. Can we figure this math out for me?
Yeah, and thank you. I heard that as I said that as well. And what would be a more accurate statement? So if everybody went up a certain percentage and the budget that was required by the local governments remained the same, then the taxation would be the same. What typically happens in a case like that, you would expect to see the mill rate drop.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I heard something. I didn't want to talk over anybody there.
No, I was just thanking you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks for catching that for me. I appreciate it.
Hey, do we have any other questions?
Sure, I have a question.
Sure.
Hello, Pappas is my name. Thanks for making yourself available to us. I understand you're volunteering your time.
I am.
Well done. You said there was 518 properties in Clinton, or was it 580? I'm not sure.
About there, yeah, 510.
Somewhere. Okay, so for 2023, I know a residential property, in my experience, over a period of 3 years has gone up over 65%. And in 2023, out of the 518 properties in Clinton, how many property sales did you use as a basis for determining the increases that you've justified? Was it 2 properties, 1 property, 10 properties?
You raise a good point, and to be honest, I'm not going to be able to give you the quantity of the answer. I won't give you a number because I simply don't know that number. What I can tell you, but what I can tell you is this: as appraisers, we look for the best information that's available. So if there's 2 sales in your town that indicate the value is either high or low, we'll use those. But then if we don't feel that's comfortable enough or that it provides enough direction, we'll start looking a little bit farther, wider. We'll start to cast that net a little deeper. So we'll start to look and say, okay, what's happening in 100 Mile House? What's happening in Cache Creek? What's happening in Ashcroft? And when you take a look at all those together, quite often you can get a better representation of what's happening, but you need to be really cognizant and really aware that each of those are different marketplaces as well. You live in Clinton for a reason, and that's probably why you don't live in Ashcroft. I'm assuming that to be the case. So we want to make sure that we use the best information available. We would love it if everybody sold enough properties each year that we could be very comfortable with regards to setting their assessment. The reality is that we have to work with what's actually out there.
And Ted, did you have one follow-up question to that?
Okay, well, I actually have two, but I guess I'll see which one do I want to mention first. Well, first of all, we're on an inflationary spiral, wouldn't you say, in our economy and Canada in general? And certainly BC assessment seems to be part of this inflationary spiral that affects us all. It affects the insurance you pay on your house. For one thing, it affects your mortgage to some degree. So you really are a catalyst that seems to be working in favor of inflationary policy, which is in contradiction to what our local government, provincial and federal government is hoping to do.
And do you have a question, Ted?
Why are you operating in this fashion, which seems to be inflationary?
Having worked for BC Assessment for a number of years, I actually have a different take on it as to what BC Assessment's role is. BC Assessment doesn't set values. We simply reflect what were the values historically. And what happens in that regard is that we simply indicate what's happening in the marketplace. Whether values go up or down is immaterial to us. What's important to us is that we reflect our values accurately and fairly. So are we used as an inflationary thing? I don't think so, because we're always looking backwards in time at the best of times anyway. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying. I feel the concern that you're seeing. I just got my insurance papers the other day, and my insurance went up 30% this year for my home insurance, and I haven't made a claim in 20 some years. So I'm not doing anything different with my house than what I was doing before, but certainly there are insurance or inflationary expectations out there right now. But as far as BC Assessment is concerned, I don't see how the function of BC Assessment is contributing to assessment in any way. And I've looked at various assessment functions across North America to see which is a better system, because I kind of like that thing, because that's why I'm in the job that I am. And I actually think that BC Assessment is doing a very valuable service to the province of British Columbia and to the communities, because we provide a very stable assessment base for which taxes are then determined. And if to look at it conversely, if you did not have a stable base, I would suggest that you're going to have a much more out of control or inflationary basis going on with property taxes as well. So we have a different opinion on what happens with BC Assessment in that regard.
You have to limit it to just the question and the follow-up, because there are other people who want to ask.
Well, if there isn't someone else, maybe I can ask one more question.
We've got one person from the digital, and then we'll go to you, sir. Kelly, you have a question?
Yes, I do. You had mentioned earlier that you could have done a better job last year, and I'm wondering what you think happened there and what you're doing now this year to make it better. Like, what went wrong last year in terms of why you could have done a better job?
What I can say in that regard is that we noticed that once the assessments were out and once we started talking to folks, that some of our values were simply overstated. And that's where I say we could have done a better job. What I would have liked to have seen is that most of the time we catch that through auditing prior to the releasing of the assessments. And last year that didn't happen in the same way. As a result of that, that's why you saw, despite the fact that there were about 29 public appeals from yourself or your neighbors, BC Assessment went in and took the extraordinary step to make sure that we corrected not just the ones of the folks that appealed, but we tried to make things as fair and equitable as possible. So really, to answer your question, Kelly, it's one of the audit process that happened. Something got through that shouldn't have got through. I can't speak specifically about what that is, because I really don't know what that was. But I can tell you that once we did notice that the values were overstated, we stepped in to make sure that we corrected that as well.
And Kelly, did you have a follow-up question at all?
I'm okay right now. Sorry, I'm just writing something down.
And,
I'm okay.
and my apologies. I'm not used to working with computers, so your voice was to the left here, so I wasn't trying to look away from the camera. I was just talking to where the voice was coming from, so apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I will take a question from the floor here.
Hi, Boris. Thanks for being here. My name is Bernie. And I have a question regarding zoning designations of our properties. Does BC Assessment have anything to do with that? the local zoning, where our properties fit into it?
We do not. BC assessment reflects the information, and this is where we really rely on the local municipalities to keep BC assessment informed as to any kind of potential changes or what the zoning is. BC assessment is not the author of that information, but certainly what we need to do is make sure that we reflect that information in our assessments.
So your information could be skewed a little bit if we were in the wrong zone by zoning rules that we have. I don't know if I said that clearly, but we find that we're in a different zone than what we think we should be in, some of us. And we don't follow right inside of it. So we're wondering if that makes any difference on our assessment eventually or not.
Well, you know, there's a lot of, I'm going to say questions. I'd like to get a lot more details about this, Bernie, but I don't think this is the right forum for it. If you do have a question for that, what I would suggest you do is you give our office a call and start the conversation with an appraiser where they can speak specifically to your property and answer your concerns directly.
Okay, no problem with that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And I'll add one extra thing about that. There's an element of that that is the villages. The village sets the zoning bylaw. So if anyone has questions specifically related to zoning, my door is always open. You're welcome to come and talk to me in my office at any time. So, and with that, does anyone else from the floor have a question? Oh, no, we've got a question coming up here, Ted.
Hi there, Murray Kane. I know you said you don't get involved in taxation, but do you have any experience in dealing with communities where the tax rate has gone up substantially and they've actually reduced the mill rate, or is that just like some theoretical thing that you think that should happen, but probably doesn't happen as it should?
You know, Bernie, I'm trying to think back to a time where I can give you an answer of that. What I can say is this: it has been my experience for my own residents and my own property that I have yet to see the tax go down. The quantity of taxes go down. What I have seen over that time is my assessment fluctuate dramatically upwards and downwards.
So your mill rate never changed?
Well, I think the opposite. The mill rate is constantly changing. So really what happens in a real broad brush and oversimplified perspective is that what happens, BC assessment will come in and determine the value of all, say the town has 10 properties, all 10 properties in that in that municipality. What happens then is that the total value of those 10 properties, that information is provided to the local taxing authority. And if the taxing authority says, well, we need $500,000 to run our budget this year, they take the $500,000, divide it by the sum of what the value of the properties is to arrive at what's referred to as a mill rate or tax rate. That tax rate is then applied to each individual property. And so if next year the assessments, let's say they stayed exactly the same as they were before for the 10 properties, but the city needed $550,000 instead of $500,000, then what would happen is that the tax rate or mill rate would change in order to make sure that the budget was actually achieved. So it's the mill rates constantly changing, as are the taxes or the assessments are likely changing as well, because it's very rare that you've got year over year where the property's worth exactly the same as it was previous.
Right. In your experience, have you seen mill rates drop?
You've already had a follow-up question. I think just to make sure we've hit everybody, we'll move on, but thank you.
Same question.
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, was it? Okay, sorry, my apologies. Yeah, and what was your question? In your experience, have you seen mill rates drop? Yeah.
So I tried to answer that question. I'm not really an expert in that. So I'm going to be really hesitant to offer any kind of advice on stuff that I'm not an expert in. I have to realize or keep in mind that I'm not just speaking for myself as an individual or a homeowner, but I'm representing BC Assessment here. And so because taxation is not my forte, I'm going to hold back, and I'd rather give no answer than a bad answer in that regard.
I have a follow-up to that.
Well, we're going to move to Susan here on the line. And then we can take a question from a new person in the audience. Hi, Susan, are you there online?
Susan is muted.
Oh, Susan, yeah, I think you're muted there.
Maybe I can put my question in, please. No?
Sorry, Annette, we want to make sure everybody's heard. So we're going to go to new people here. See if I can unmute
It's
her.
a new
No?
question.
No, I know. We
It's a
want to
new
make sure everybody's heard. So we're just going to go to a new person here. If there's anyone new from the audience who would like an opportunity to ask a question of BC Assessment here. Nobody new? Okay. Sure, go ahead with your question there, Annette.
It's a little question. Boris, in regards to the 29 appeals, I would like to know out of which classification they come, and you kindly changed the improper assessment after those 29 appeals came and added it up to be 56. And I'd like also to know what kind of classifications they fell into.
I would love to give you an answer, and I just simply don't know that. I don't have that information with me tonight.
Could we follow up on that, please?
At the same time, I'm not, well, I guess to some degree we could, but the purpose of this forum was not to really analyze and go over what happened corporately from during the 2023 review period. Really what I think is a better use of our time is to focus on the 2024 assessment and make sure that those are correct, because that's really what I have, or we have, control over right now. The 2023's assessments are done, they're finished, there's no adjustment to those at this point, and it's the 2024 ones from a homeowner's perspective. I really want to make sure that we have the opportunity to get those correct.
Thanks, Annette. Susan Swan has asked her question here via the chat. She was wondering how many advance notices went out this year to advise of drastic increases. Do you happen to have those numbers for us?
I don't have those numbers, no. And,
all right.
And just for those other folks who might not know what that is, what we've done as a corporation is that where we see that properties are changing greater than typical, we go through and we provide what's called an early notification letter, and that's usually sent out at the beginning of November. And December. And the reason we do that is because there are some things that we want to make sure that property owners are aware of. We just don't want to have a significant change in either the valuation or to the classification of a property and catch someone by surprise. So we try to do that extra step to try to give them a notice. Now, I do know that this year, far fewer notices were mailed out province-wide. I don't have any kind of numbers as to how many were mailed out, even within my assessment region, nor specifically within the area of Clinton here. I just don't know.
Okay, thank you, Boris. Is there anyone new?
So I just want to answer part of Annette's question. I was part of a property that my house assessment was decreased, like my original assessment, and then I got notice that it was decreased, even though I did not appeal my assessment. And I'm residential, so. And my question is, you are not a mill rate or tax rate expert, but is there somewhere that we could find one, or a direction that you could point us to find one?
Might be able to answer some questions about the mill rate or tax rate when in the right forum. We did have a mill rate presentation where we answered questions just a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas. And one other thing I would say to everyone too is stay tuned for the budget season. We're going to be having our public open budget meetings coming up. And everyone is welcome to attend those and to see where the village is looking to go with its budget for 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Can I do a follow-up?
Okay, we've got a few people waiting, but yeah, go ahead. And then we'll go to Ted. And then we'll go to Kelly here. Kelly still has a question.
Hi, Boris, me again. I know you're a big city guy. Could I have an answer to her question? Do you have someone you would recommend, say from Kamloops or Vancouver, being that you're in this business, have been since, you know, I was a child? Someone you would recommend to help a small town out?
Sorry, to help you out in which regard?
To give us some advice on mill rates and whatnot. You've been in this business longer than most.
Yeah. You know, my standard answer, or I think my best answer, is to talk to the folks who are actually determining what those taxes are. And in that case, it'd be talking to the village of Clinton, because they're the folks that are setting those values. But in addition, the village of Clinton might be able to put you in touch with their provincial counterparts who help determine a large other portions of what the taxation is. So in that regard, that would be your member of the Legislative Assembly or your MLA.
So municipal affairs would be the next step. If you couldn't work something out amongst the community, you would bring in BC Affairs, or who would you bring in?
Oh, gee. And again, I'm out of my comfort zone and what I'm an expert in. So if I gave you any advice, I'd have to really know what I was doing, and I'm gonna run away rather than send you in the wrong direction.
Oh, fair enough. I appreciate your time, Boris.
No problem.
Okay, now Ted, you had a follow-up question as well. We'll take one question from Ted and then see if anyone online has a question, and then I think we'll wrap up here pretty quick.
You're a Crown Corporation, I understand. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Sort of like Canada Revenue Agency. Crown Corporation.
No, I don't think they're a Crown Corp. More like Canada Post.
Okay, well, that's good. So if in the course of the procedure, if someone has a complaint about what's happening with their property, it goes through various steps, and one of them is a tribunal. I'd like to know who is the tribunal being paid for? Is it being paid for the members of the tribunal by BC Assessment? Are they independent of BC Assessment? And depending on what your answer is, I'd like to know who and how do you access the ultimate authority if you have a bone to pick over an issue with BC Assessment.
Okay, thank you, Ted.
Sure. And I think you raise a good point in that we want to make sure that the assessments are fair and the process is fair afterwards. The 3-member panels that consist of the property assessment review panel are not appointed by BC Assessment. BC Assessment has no influence of that at all. That is a government appointees, and I actually don't even know exactly which of the government is that's involved in that. But I do know that I have that when I go to the panel, it could be different people all the time, and I have no recollection as to who they are. Or it changes year to year, and there's multiple.
That was your question, Ted. Thank you.
Ultimately, though, my ultimate question was, where does the ultimate authority lie?
Okay, Ted,
There is a problem.
thank you very much.
Aside from the tribunal. To the Supreme Court of British Columbia.
Okay, Ted's had his opportunity, Boris. Thank you. So we're just going to take any last final questions from the audience. If anyone has any last final comments they'd like to make, or questions, I mean, and then we'll conclude tonight's presentation. Boris has handled a lot of really tough questions tonight, so thank you very much, Boris, for coming. Don't know if we want to give him a round of applause here. We really appreciate you making the time to speak with us today. Understand, you know, it's winter conditions and you guys are in your busy season here, so we appreciate you just taking the time to join us on the call.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you folks. And again, I really want to encourage you to look at our website, bcassessment.ca. And if you have concerns once you see that, please give us a call. Our contact information is on your assessment notice. Our appraisers want to chat with you in the same way that you want to make sure your assessment's right. The one thing I would want to caution, the assessment should reflect the market value of property. The change in assessment for year over year is not a valid reason, or that won't get you the result that you're hoping to achieve if you are appealing your assessment. It really comes down to, is your property worth what the assessment was as of last summer, or is your property worth Does your assessment fairly reflect what your property would have sold for if it was for sale last summer? If we've done that, irrespective of whether the value either increased or decreased, then we've done our job. So thank you again. Go to bcassessment.ca and be safe out there tonight.
Thanks, Boris.
Okay, take care now.
All right, goodbye. And thanks everybody for joining us online and everyone for braving the weather here.